All right, so forgive me, but I think we'll start the meeting for the AWS. So first off is just a call to order and then an approval of the agenda. And Director Wallace, if there's one change to the agenda you'd like to suggest?
Yes, thank you. I would just like to add a section to the agenda to provide a notice of motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So after reports, we'll just do new business and you can introduce the notice of motion at that point. Thank you very much. First off, adoption, then secondly, adoption of the minutes. Are there any errors or omissions to the minutes? Seeing none, Mayor O'Brien and Councillor Grenz moving the minutes. All in favor? It passes, thank you. And next up is a presentation from MNP on the audited financial statements.
Morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, the board, for inviting me here to attend your meeting today. I am going to do a very short presentation on your financial statements for 2024. If you're following in your package, I'm on page 10. I'm going to skip right to the good stuff. Before I go into the numbers, thank you to staff at the city for working on getting the financial statements ready and going through the audit process with us. It goes very smoothly. So on page 10 here, you can see your statement of operations for the year for the Arrowsmith water service. And I'm going to look down that 2024 total column there. So you can see total expenses for the year of $288,000, $117,979 in admin, $111 in operations, and $59,000 in maintenance. So total expenses of $288,717, which is basically the same as the joint venture's contributions. It's only up by a couple $100 there. So essentially matching those anticipated costs for the year. And then a small grant there coming in for study. So at the end of the year, you have an accumulated surplus of $7,049,000, which is primarily the value of the dam and assets that on the page prior, page 9, you look there, on the books at $6.4 million of capital assets and receivables from the ventures of $585,000. So that's the quick and dirty version, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are some from the board.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Director Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. It was nice and brief. My question is about how are the accumulated reserves accounted for in this financial plan? Because when looking at the two financial plans where this information is contained, one is the RDN financial plan showing a declining balance of a reserve fund that was originally created for this service for French Creek. You're suggesting, as per the RDN financial plan, that $585,630 are financial assets due from members, but what portion of those financial assets are reserve funds? Is that something that's accounted for in this plan, or is that in the RDN plan? It's very confusing to try to find the information, and if you could just speak to how those reserves are being accounted for. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Director. Good question. So I'll get you to flip to page 12. And there's two spots here where you can see here. So at the top on page 12, you see the due from joint ventures. And you can see there the $585,000 that is the financial asset receivable for the joint venture is $541 from the city, $67 from Palm Beach, and then actual owing to the regional district. And then at the bottom, in the accumulated surplus, the reserve for future expenditures is $575,000. So in that $585,000, that's where that reserve is set up. And you can see that each community and the regional district are allocated their proportion of that as well. So essentially the receivables there is close. It's just about $10,000 over, just a discrepancy in timing on some of the annual expenses, but that's where that reserve is being held.
Thank you. And just to follow up then, so I guess my first question is the $575,249 reserve for future expenditures. Do those amounts allocate back to shareholders percentage of ownership or contributions paid in over years? I guess that's really the crux of the question. Because the regional district doesn't break out Area E and Area G French Creek, how do I know what percentage or what amount of the $128,000 in reserve funds would be allocated to each of the separate areas?
Sure, thank you. So I'll start and then I'll probably defer to staff to get more into the details on that one. So most of this reserve and the transactions here are flowing out of the actual joint venture agreement itself and the functions and the mechanisms there for the cost sharing. But with respect to the actual breakdown between the three and then further into the regional district, that's where I'll defer to staff for any further breakdown.
And do staff have any comment? I'm just seeing a microphone coming on, so perhaps
Yes.
that's the case.
Thanks. Through the chair. I can answer a portion of that. What I would recommend is with respect to the reserve with the RDN, that the RDN help, I think that you're referring to, it definitely would be finance staff at the RDN that should be answering your question with respect to that. What I will say is in the financial plan, there is $42,000 each year as a budgeted transfer to reserve in totality, so split amongst the joint venturers. And then the reserve for future expenditures would be accumulation of that, as well as then if there's any under budget or over budget in any year with respect to any project specific would be also included in that reserve that is on the AWS financial statements.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, I just, so if Ms. Moore has a response, do let us know on looking at the little indications on the Zoom call. So, oh, and there she is.
Thank you through the chair. I have the question. I do not have the answer to the question, but I do have the question and I will be able to provide an answer.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moore.
Yes, thank you. And I just have one point of clarification on the 42,000 transfer to reserve. So I just want to clarify that that amount as stated was the RDN contribution to transfer to reserve from the RDN to the AWS. Is that correct?
Through the chair, no, the 42,000 is the combined for all three venturers transferred to reserve on an annual basis in the financial plan. I'm just going to look and see if I have the RDN specific amount here. So the portion of that, sorry, for the RDN is $5,800.
Thank you. So I will
Oh.
add.
My apologies, sorry to interject. That was the Qualicum Beach portion. The RDN portion is $9,400.
Thank you. So again, my question lies between the two financial reports because the fund for bulk water French Creek transfers $58,877. That's 2022, $63,740 transferred to reserves at the RDN in the RDN financial plan for French Creek bulk water. And I don't see where that comes in to the operation plan here. So I would just like to add that point of clarification for Ms. Moore to provide that clarity on the reserve funds that are represented in the RDN financial plan, and then to further understand in the reserve funds for AWS, where area G French Creek reserve funds are being accounted for. Thank you.
Ms. Moore, did you catch that?
Yes, through the chair, thank you. And I've caught both parts of the question.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions for the delegation? Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to our delegation. Thanks for coming, Corey. The due to and from joint venturers, why is it that the regional district amount is due to them, that they prepaid or something, or how's that work?
Yeah, and again, I'll start and then defer to staff. Timing of payments and contributions is really what's happening there as the costs and expenses are incurred and when those requisitions are coming through. There's always timing delays. I mean, we're doing a cutoff at December 31st to see where the expenses were, and then the timing of checks back and forth can impact where that due to from lies.
So they maybe overpaid once the final math is done?
Potentially. I can't confirm that at the moment, but I think staff might speak to that.
Yes, thanks through the chair to Councillor Grenz. That is, your assumption there is correct. So the RDN would pay the budgeted requisition amount, and then if expenses were under budget during the year, then they had essentially overpaid. So the joint venture technically owes them money at the end of the year.
Also, sorry, I'll jump into, also important to note, the city's number is high because the joint venture doesn't have its own bank account. So the city is managing the cash transactions, and that's why that number looks higher there.
Some good nuts and bolts to understand. Yeah, thank you.
Good question. Thank you very much. Are any further questions for the delegation? All right, seeing none, thank you very much,
Okay.
Corey, for your
Thank you,
hard work,
Chair.
and thanks staff for making it easy for him to do his job. Moving on then to the next item in the agenda, my apologies. Reports, City of Parksville, verbal report.
Sorry, if I may, Chair, could we get a motion from the board to receive the audited statements?
Sorry, I'm not used to that. Yeah, you're right. Sorry, it's just a motion to receive the audit
moved.
statements. Councillor Grenz moving, Mayor O'Brien seconding. All in favor? Passes. And I assume that'd be for recommendation both 1 and 2. Okay, thanks. Sorry, now we can move on to number 5. Thank you very much, Kiva. So City of Parksville, verbal report. I'm not sure to be providing that.
I think you're going to get me today. On behalf of Keith and his group, thanks to Barb for putting together a nice presentation, and I'll try and take you through it. The other one. Here we go. Okay. Are you managing the moving forward or am I?
Either way.
Okay. All right. Cool. All right. Thanks for the opportunity to present the operations update. I don't imagine I'll be doing this again because the city's manager will be in place when we meet next time, but hopefully I can do a reasonable job and Keith can back me up if I miss anything. So just a look at where the, how's the mic working? Is it okay? Yeah. This is looking at where the dam level is this year. And you can see it's full, which is a good thing. And we're still spilling from the dam. So that's a good thing too. We're going to talk a bit more later on about the snow levels that are up in the mountains right now. But, you know, for all intents and purposes, if you looked at how much water we have based on is the dam still spilling and is it full, it's kind of a normal year. We'll talk about the abnormal part of it in a slide or two. This slide is kind of complicated, but it shows sort of the flows in the river over a number of years. There's a couple of highlights shown in there. The little green circle at the bottom left shows one of the low points in 2025 when the river got very low. The green bars are how much water we release into the river to meet our environmental flow needs requirements. Over the past few years, that's kind of the average flow, just to give you a sense of when the water goes out of the dam. And you can see that we're releasing water pretty late in the year these days, up to the end of October. We'll talk a bit more about that as well. Getting into the climate a little bit, this one shows the rainfall at the Public Works Yard. And if you look at the orange line, you can see that we're a little bit below min-max range, which is quite believable. It hasn't rained for a long time. I think that 10 minutes of tropical rain we had yesterday doesn't really help. But anyway, you can see we're not getting a lot of rain. It's a pretty dry year. The blue obviously is the monthly min-max range, and we're well below it. We're well below the average of the last 10 years as well, which is the red line. Comment at this point that's probably useful is, you know, we've been functionally in a drought in this part of the world for the last 5 years. Just this year, the provincial government and their drought ranking system has changed dramatically. And up to this point, the provincial government's drought level indicators took into account not only the relative levels of surface water and groundwater around the areas, around the local area, but also the risk that that might cause. And that risk factor was placed on top of the math, if I could say it that way, to give a little more fulsome picture of what kind of drought we were in. Starting this year, the province has changed their mind on that, and they're publishing their drought levels based purely on the math. So they're not looking at any of the risk potential or the risk cost that might fall into that in terms of ranking a drought. So every Thursday, they're going to change the drought rankings, and it's already gone up to 3 and back down to 1 in the last 3 weeks. And it's usually updated on Thursdays. So I didn't get a chance to look this morning, but it might be back up to 2 again. Anyways, just a word of warning if you're looking at those numbers that they have dramatically changed the way they calculate those things. So this one is going to talk a bit more about the snow problem. So as you know, from previous years, and last year we did a bit of a presentation on this, we're involved in a snow pillow research project that involves flying a plane and doing some LiDAR surveys of the snowpack up in the Englishman watershed, amongst other things. That research project kind of concluded last year, but this board agreed to put $5,000 into the table to get some data for this year. And we had our first fly on June the 4th, I think it was. And the results from that were pretty telling and pretty consistent with what we've learned the last few years, in that there's a massive differential between the amount of snow and snow water equivalent, which is actually the amount of water that's held up there in snow. So there's a big difference in the snow water equivalent measured at our single point snow pillow station as compared to this much more accurate LiDAR model. And I think this year it was a difference of 2.65 times. I think it was about 2 last year, 1.95. So what's that saying basically is that our snow pillow station has been really overestimating the amount of snow we have up in the mountains for the past few years. And that's kind of illustrated on the graph there. Those orange bars are what the LiDAR research project has measured for snow water equivalent compared to what the snow pillow station has measured. So the snow pillow station's in red, and well, all the lines actually, but there's quite a difference there. So functionally, what that tells us is that I guess the snow pillow station isn't giving us a great measure of how much water we have up there, but it's also saying we have a lot less water stored as snow up there than we think we do. And in years past, you know, we like to think of the reservoir being full sometime in the winter, and then all the snow would fall, and we'd get to fill the reservoir kind of again with all the snow as it melted in our small watershed up there. And I think what we're starting to realize is that may be the case, but there's a whole lot less water up there than we thought. And I think that'll come up a little more as we get into the work that KWL did for us on the City of Parksville's water study, and also on our operating rule, which we'll talk about in a slide or two. Some operations and maintenance highlights. There was an earthquake, and you know, the staff went through the procedures they were supposed to do after that. I think we came out of that relatively unscathed, no damage to the dam at least. And we've got some new solar panels up at the dam that are going to hopefully help us keep our communication network powered up. There's a few capital projects that are going on there. Pretty simple. It gets a lot more complicated in the AWS world later. But the solar panel upgrade, there's still a bit of fiddle-faddling to do there. And the PLC upgrade is happening. So I know the city's working hard to get their contractor in place to do the PLC and those bits. I just wanted to talk a bit about the operating rule. So as you know, from the last few years, we've had to go sort of cap in hand back to the province in the summertime, asking them for a temporary operating rule to reduce the amount of environmental flow that we're required to maintain under the Orange Bridge. And just to review how that works, Our water license allows us to withdraw a bunch of water from the river for drinking in return for maintaining a minimum flow for fish. And that minimum flow for fish is measured underneath the Orange Bridge. So on this chart, that's what the EFN is, environmental flow needs. So the old sort of operating rule that's sort of in place or has been in place for a number of years uses the number 1.6 cubic meters per second as the environmental flow needs, which is we just plain don't have enough water in the dam to do that all year in these drought years. So for the past few years, we've gone to the province with some data and asked them to allow us to maintain a much lower environmental flow need. Last year, we had a quite well-featured operating rule from the province, and just today they've sent us that rule again for this year. We did embark on quite a project with them and our consultants, KWL, to come up with a permanent operating rule that wouldn't need this year-to-year thing. Unfortunately, we lost a few months in that process with the loss of the manager, and we didn't quite get it done in time, but we're almost done. So I can confidently say we'll have that in place by next year. We're right on the cusp of it a couple of weeks ago, and the province just said, you know, we don't have time to do all the consultation we need to do to get this done. So we'll try and go back to what we did last year, and we'll get back on this in the fall, and we'll get it in place for next year. So I'm quite optimistic about that. So this chart that's up on the screen there, I don't want to bore you with details, but this is kind of a reliability analysis that KWL did as part of their work to build a model for the operating rule. And there's a couple of things that I just point out as relevant. The MLD column, it talks about how much, MLD row talks about how much water we're going to withdraw from the river for drinking water. And you can see the 16 megaliters per day, 24 megaliters per day, 48 megaliters per day, which represents the planned increase in withdrawals from the river as time goes on and development increases, population increases. And the column on the second from the left under MLD, that lists what the environmental flow need setting has to be. So that's 1 cubic meter per second under the bridge all the way up to 1.6. And you can see based on the mathematical model we've got that if that EFN is 1 cubic meter per second, we have a very high likelihood of being able to meet that, 94% currently, which is a good thing. And it obviously declines based on how much water we are required to maintain there. So that's kind of the point for the first chart there. And then the second chart below that talks about how many years did we stay above the siphon level? So the way our dam is configured, we can withdraw water sort of out of the dam really easily down to a certain point. And when the water level gets quite low, we have a siphon that we rely on to pull water out of there. And we can't pull as much water through the siphon as we can through the regular outlet. So the second chart here just indicates, you know, how often do we stay above the siphon range? And again, it's relating to that flow required for environmental flow needs. If we can get that down to a lower point around 1, then we have a very high degree of confidence that we will be able to maintain that environmental flow need all the way to Halloween. And that's the other thing that the province is interested in doing, is making sure that we maintain a minimum flow in the river all the way to Halloween, which I'm kind of old, but it used to start raining long before Halloween, but it hasn't done that in the last few years. So this is our consultant's first draft of an operating rule curve for the dam. And I don't want to dwell on this either, but it basically says, if you looked at that August 13th at the top of the chart there, that if we were sitting there with a full dam on August 13th, we could, with some confidence, maintain a minimum flow in the river under the bridge at 1.2 cubic meters per second all the way to Halloween without getting into the siphon zone on the dam, which is represented by the yellow area at the bottom. So obviously that's not reasonable. August 13th is way later. So we're operating somewhere in that blue range, which is really indicates to us, and the science would suggest that we really need that minimum EFN flow to be 1 cubic meter per second to give us the confidence that we will make it to Halloween. And I think I've said this before in this forum, but once the water's gone, we can't get it back. So you really have to be as proactive and conservative as you can in the water to make sure that you have it there. And sure enough, if it starts to pour rain in July, we can increase that number. But to make sure we have it there at the end of the year, we have to be very conservative. So this hasn't been accepted by the province yet, but this is what we're hoping to get them around to by next year. And that's it.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Mayor O'Brien.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks very much, Murray, and also my appreciation to staff for working with the province on this operating rule. It's been a lot of consultation to get it to a reasonable level, and it really is, as we've said before, it's just a math calculation to divide it by the amount of days needed. And this is to get the 1 cubic meter is actually a great step forward. It'd be nice if we could get that, as you say, permanent. Am I correct in stating that in the drought period, late in the summer, August, beginning of September, that by maintaining that 1 cubic meter, that we are basically out of the Arrowsmith Dam, then we're basically not receiving any base river flow as well. Like to put it bluntly, we will not be withdrawing any water at the intake for domestic water for the plant. We'll be relying, the city of Parksville will be relying on the well system instead. Is that correct?
Through the chair to Mayor O'Brien, that's not quite right. So all the analysis takes into account the amount of water that's being withdrawn for drinking water at the plant, at the intake. So this all assumes that that continues to operate. So the measurement for environmental flow needs happens after our intake. It happens at the bridge. So we need to maintain, if you want to use the number of 1 cubic meter per second, we need to maintain that amount of flow under the bridge, and that's after we've used the water that we need for drinking water. So, which is a relatively small amount of water compared to the environmental flow need, which is a good thing. So yeah, we don't anticipate that we would ever be in a position where we couldn't run the intake. It's more a question of, can we release enough water at the right times of the year to meet that environmental flow need with our intake in operation? And that's the basis of the water license that we have there as well, is that, you know, we have the right to pull that much water as long as we can maintain the minimum environmental flow. So yeah, we won't be relying on wells solely at any point of the year.
So if I may follow up, so that would suggest that there is some base river flow as well.
Yeah, so I guess I forgot about that part of your question. So we've done a lot of modeling as part of this operating rule work to try and establish what the sort of the water budget is for the watershed there, and trying to establish what the base flow is. And just to review the terminology there in case everybody's not up to speed on that. So there's water that flows into the river naturally from groundwater sources and rain and things like that, which is known as base flow. So if our dam wasn't there, all the water that was in the river would be base flow. What we find is, and the history would suggest, that the base flow goes to zero in the Englishman and has done, I guess, over time. So when we're getting down to the really drought times of the year and we need to maintain 1 cubic meter per second, there's still a little bit of base flow happening in those times, but not very much. And we've seen that recently where we struggled to get enough water out of the dam to meet that requirement because the base flow is so low. And that's a little bit of a technical problem related to our ability to withdraw water from the siphon in the dam. Yeah, if we had to pull 1 cubic meter per second out of the dam in late August, we'd struggle because of the limitations on the siphon.
Good information. Thanks, Murray. That clears up a lot of questions. Thank you.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, thank you for the report. Talking about the snow pillow in the watershed around the dam, is there any impact on the amount of trees that are surrounding the dam that affects how much snow is kept there? Is that related at all?
Through the chair to Councillor Grant, that hasn't been identified as an issue. There is around in our little watershed up there, it's not fully forested nor fully cleared yet. But the LiDAR is such that it doesn't really care about the trees. I mean, we've got a bare land look at it and we've got the winter look at it. So The people that are doing the LiDAR trials, they are foresters, and that has never been identified as an issue. So that's all,
Okay, so just
all I
the-
can say about that.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So to clarify, there's no understanding one way or the other whether if more trees were logged, whether that would affect the snow pillow.
That's correct.
Okay. Another question, if I may. The charts around the percentage of the year that would be, yeah, there you go. I guess these are just when the dam is actually releasing water, right? That would,
Yeah.
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 And then because the other times of the year in the previous chart, which we even saw in 2025, when the dam is not releasing water.
This one?
Yeah. So it looks like around February, the flow rate in the river with no dam releasing water was actually very low.
Yeah. Through the chair, just a comment on that. I mean, in an extreme drought year, the base flow in the winter will be extremely low too. And sort of the climate conditions that might lead to that are a very quick freeze up in the early part of the year. Those kind of things would make a big difference. But typically, as you can see by the yellow line on this graph, the flow in the river in the wet season is quite incredibly high. And the river is very flashy. So, one day of rain can cause an order of magnitude change in the flow in the river as it's measured. But yeah, the right climatic conditions in the winter can cause us to have extremely low flow at that time of the year.
So if I can follow up then on that, if there are bigger swings in the weather conditions, then that will have big swing effect on the river, which we are potentially seeing happening more, where from maybe week to week, it would get very cold all of a sudden and then warm up again. For example, in February.
Mm-hmm. And I think, what we know is the wrong verb. What the experts propose is going to happen, of course, and we've talked about this here before too, is that we're going to have much warmer winters with a lot more rain. And the rain is going to come in fewer torrential events than a consistent amount of rainfall, which is going to lead to even more of that very flashy behavior that you've seen there, and potentially also more of those lows in the winter in between rainfall events, because the ground doesn't hold a lot of water up there. That's why the river's so flashy. Yeah.
Okay. One more, if I may. As we're looking at the POR, I guess the only part you've shared here is relevant to us is around how much water is left and all that sort of thing. Presumably, there's also a case being made about the environmental needs and what actually is the right amount for fisheries.
Yeah.
Is there federal involvement in that as well, or is that just the province?
Good question. So the feds are involved. The DFO is at the table at the conversation. So we're having, this is a little awkward. There. So the feds are at the table. And, a lot of work was done at the sort of early stages of dam development that established the minimum critical flow to be around 0.7, which is that's a problematic number for the fisheries folks. So they don't want to go there, but I think there's some good science that established that as that's the absolute, fish are dying at that level kind of thing. And I think the new work that we've done, we haven't repeated the work in the river to figure out what that minimum flow is, but we've taken advantage of the science that was done there. And I don't think we haven't had any opinions from either the DFO folks or the provincial fisheries folks that number is no longer applicable. I mean, nobody wants to get near that number, but I think there's some agreement that that's a reasonable number on the absolute minimum. Yeah.
Any further questions? Director Wallace.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to loop back on Dr. Floyd's work, because he's primarily doing work on behalf of the ministry and has been doing so, to my knowledge, since 2015. Is that correct?
Bill Floyd is the fellow he's one of the principals in the Coastal Hydrology Research Lab that does the work on LiDAR snow pillow. And it's, believe it or not, completely unfunded by the ministry. It's funded by DWWP primarily for the 5-year study period. So through the RDN funded that. They have some other partners. Comox Valley Regional District is also in this because they have an interest in their watershed, and Metro Capital Regional District also. So that's the original research that's going on there. We've made many appeals for the province to fund this because it makes so much sense, but we haven't managed to get there yet, which is why, you know, we're only getting 1, potentially 2 flybys of our system because we're limited in how much money we can put in there. It's expensive to put the plane in the air. So yeah, it's not a ministry funded exercise. I will say that they're hoping to start the program up again with a new partner, Metro Vancouver, and you know, by air for a plane, that's pretty close to here. So that'll help us keep our costs low to be able to still do this once or twice a year.
Thank you. So just so I understand then, we're in the midst of a 5-year study, and will that study be available to the public, or is this just an annual check-in on what was concluded in 2015 that we're overestimating? And so the actual quote was that we're severely underestimating the severity of drought in the history of this area, and we're overestimating how much water storage we have. That was the
So
report.
almost. We're severely underestimating or overestimating the amount of snow we have in terms of snow water equivalent. And snow water equivalent is how much water you get when the snow melts. So the study has told us that we're really overestimating the amount of water we've got sitting up there when it's frozen in the wintertime. So that's the key message to get out there. The 5-year research project concluded in 2024, I think, maybe 2023. And that report is publicly available. We presented it to the RDN board, and it's on the DWWP website. So that's all out there. It covered quite a few watersheds, not just ours. And so what we're doing now is basically with Bill Floyd's group, trying to find people to put money at this so that we can keep it going, because we want to have repeatable data from year to year. It makes it a little bit more easier to use it that way.
Sure. And the reason I was asking the question is because we've known some of this since 2015, and there was a good documentary made about it. But the concern I have is about the October 31st target. So if we know we don't have freshet continuing to replenish the Arrowsmith Dam that we thought we had to the factor of 2.65, like that's a big number.
That's snow pillow, right?
Yeah. So if we don't have snow pillow, like we're overestimating that, I think that was your conclusion, that the LiDAR is helping us bridge the gap between what we thought we knew for snow, that we were using the snow pillow and that investment was made versus what we have, then extending the requirement for, I guess, storage. We're just using October 31st because that was part of the original rule. But if we don't have the freshet later in the season, we should we not also be looking at the October 31st target?
So there's a couple of things to unpack there through the chair. I'm not quite sure that freshet is the right word in this case, because we're really concerned about our watershed, you know, from our drinking water perspective and our ability to take advantage of our water license. We're only really concerned about the watershed behind the dam, right? And that's where the snow pillow directly affects us. I mean, yes, it has a contribution to the base flow in the river, but our watershed is only about 5 square kilometers up there. So the amount of water that we have in that little 5 square kilometer piece is really what we're looking at to back up the actual liquid water that's in there. And the October 31st date, to talk about that, that's not really related to any of our licenses to date. That's in these conversations about operating rule, that's what the provincial and federal fisheries folks consider to be the day that they don't have to really worry too much about the fish anymore. I'm not a fish guy, but that's their big day, is the end of October. And you'll see some correspondence on this talks about October 15th or October 31st. From my perspective, it's easy just to think about Halloween. It keeps it clear.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying then that the provisional rule is not factoring any of the LiDAR work. That's a separate study. Is that Is that a fair statement then?
So the operating rule work that we're doing is aware of that. But there's not enough data there to base the study water balance on. I think we get another year or two of work on this, and we're going to be looking at. We have to keep this model up to date for the province. That's going to be one of the things we have to do as part of the license. We're going to get a bit more data. If we can figure out a way to get this snow pillow LiDAR work done reliably, then we can adjust the model to reflect that. But without getting into a big conversation about hydrology and things that I don't really know that much about, the layman's observation of the snowpack up there is that the snow is up high and most of the ground area is down low. So the snow's contribution to the base flow in the river is important at the higher parts of the river, but not at the lower parts of the river, right? From a base flow contribution. Again, I'm not a hydrologist or a hydrogeologist. That's just my observation of how that works.
So any further questions for Murray? I would point out too that the city of Parksville had an excellent presentation on June 16th. Their June 16th meeting on all things water. So I watched that. There was a slide to Councillor Gren's point about the minimum flow for fish, where it actually showed the minimum level necessary for a variety of species at different points of the year. Very informative presentation. Strongly recommend people who feel strongly about AWS and are worried about water to watch that presentation. Very informative. Thank you, Murray, for all your work. With that, I think we're ready to move on to new business. Thank you very much again, Murray. Really appreciate your hard work.
Should we move
Director
to
Wallace.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if we moved the motion that the presentation be received for information.
Sorry, I'm so used to reports not having a read. Sorry, my council, we don't do a motion after just like a verbal update. I'm sorry. You're right. We should move that the update be received for information. Mayor O'Brien, Director Wallace, all in favor? My apologies. Thank you very much, Director Wallace. Now we move on to new business.
Thank you. So I would just like to make a notice of motion to request that staff arrange a special in-camera meeting at the earliest convenience under section 90I and G, section 90I and G. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we'll be ready to move on to adjournment. All in favor? Mayor O'Brien, Councillor Grenz, all in favor, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everybody. So this time I'd like to call to order the meeting of the English River Water Service Joint Venture Management Board meeting for June 19th, 2025. So, and with respect to that, I'd also like to recognize the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territories upon who we gather with gratitude. Number two, approval of the agenda. Recommendation is that the agenda be approved as presented with respect to the paper copies that we have or that are online. The motion to adopt the move by Councillor Grenz, seconded by Mayor O'Brien. All those in favor? That motion carries unanimously. And number three, adoption of the minutes. Minutes of the English River Water Service Management Board meeting held October 31st, 2024. Recommendation is that, excuse me, that the minutes of the English River Water Service Management Board meeting of October 31st, 2024 be adopted. Moved by Mayor O'Brien, seconded by Councillor Grenz. All those who in favor? Any opposed? Okay, under number 4. Special business. Pursuant to section 90 and 1G and I of the Community Charter, Council proceed, the board, the English River Water Board, proceed to close meeting to consider an item relating to potential litigation affecting the municipality and the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege. Is there a motion? Moved by Mayor O'Brien, seconded by Councillor Grenz. All those in favor of moving in camera? Any opposed?